Sean, thanks very much for joining us. You've recently done a piece where you've looked at the future of logistics and seen an aspect of that which is kind of through repurposing the past. Let's pick up some of the thoughts around that.
A lot of investment has been made over the 20th century based around the way we did things, specifically the way we shopped for stuff. So if you look at most of the developments that took place in the latter half of the 20th century, these were the development of large out-of-town shopping malls or large out-of-town supermarkets with huge amounts of space for car parking because everyone, drove. Everyone moved to the city. If they went into the city, we needed car parks. So there's lots of infrastructure developed for a mobile population where the customer moves to the retailer. And that was our weekend activities. We used to go to superstores or go to malls, and we'd walk around and mix, and you'd collect all these different stores together. Now, ever since the financial crash, and in fact, probably more so since 2016, there's been the start of what has been called a retail apocalypse. And a lot of these stores are starting to shut. And the sort of Amazon of the 20th century, which was, Sears, sort of part of a bankruptcy in the US, and a lot of the big retailers have really been struggling. And a lot of these malls have been really struggling to attract new tenants or to even retain their existing ones. The pandemic has kind of heightened that to a certain extent because at the moment no one's going anywhere to do any shopping, and most of these have shut their doors. So we've moved towards a more sort of e-commerce based sort of shopping revolution. But what's that do for the infrastructure that's actually there? Are these going to be just demolished, given that we're not going to be shopping in that same way, at the same volume? Or is there a way potentially that they could be repurposed in order to provide, the sort of logistical infrastructure we need to support this new on-demand electronic ordering world? And I looked into this, and if you look at somewhere like China, they're pretty much building everything from new. So they haven't got cities with huge amounts of sort of cultural heritage. They have kind of flattened and rebuilt themselves a few times, but they've never really industrialized until recently. So unlike Eastern and Western Europe, which has got basically city centers and stuff that were developed mostly for the horse and car, they don't lend themselves in the same way to being sort of just demolished and rebuilt in the same way that maybe they've done in some of the Eastern things. So I looked at this, and I've noticed a couple of trends that happened. One of which was these large malls that are going out of business are starting to be acquired by companies like Amazon and repurposed as fulfillment centers. And there's a number of benefits for them for that. The location being the primary one. Shopping malls were specifically designed to be close to highways, to be close to high population areas. They've already been completely laid out with all the water, the plumbing, the electricity, and all those sorts of things. And they're big. These are big spaces. So Amazon has been acquiring a number of these malls that have gone out of business and basically repurposing them as fulfillment centers. And I think this will continue, or they could be repurposed as data centers, for example, again because of the location. And then when you move into the city centers, we have got large amounts of prime real estate that is effectively given over to car parking. Specifically space that is underground. So there's a lot of underground car parks at this moment in time. Now, at the moment, we're starting to see that a lot of inner cities becoming pedestrianized. But if you imagine when autonomous vehicles become ubiquitous in about the next 4 to 5 years, the car becomes an asset that effectively just continually moves around rather than has to be just parked up and left. So what do we do with these underground car parks? Well, actually, they're perfectly designed because they're in the middle of city centers to fulfill the needs of where we put inventory in order to meet, this urban population so that we can deliver things in a very short time frame. And companies like Common Sense Robotics, which is recently rebranded as Fabric, has taken this idea and basically building vertical, not very high, I think it's less than 11 feet, but they can take an underground car park and convert it into a fully autonomous warehouse run by sort of this ASRS systems, these automated storage and retrieval systems, so that we could have a number of these that are networked together across city centres where currently there's just dead car parking space. And that could be underneath an office block, it could be underneath an existing retail mall that's still maybe quite successful in the prime city centre. So rather than having to sort of flatten things, we could potentially use these spaces to be the urban logistics centres moving forwards. Now, how do you get inventory from one to the other? Well, if you look at what China's doing, they're working on things like tube logistics. Tube logistics is very similar to Hyperloop that you would have seen. So the idea of sort of shooting things through a sealed, vacuum sealed tunnel. And interestingly, when I looked into this is not necessarily a new concept. In fact, it was something that we've been doing in most of our European cities, specifically London, Paris, Prague, for example. I think there's 5 major cities where we used to send mail and small parcels across the city in sealed tubes. Most of these fell into disrepair, but of course the infrastructure is still there, just waiting to be repurposed. So there's a lot of pieces of existing infrastructure that could quite easily be repurposed into, service a more e-commerce driven retail environment.
Great. Very interesting, Sean. Thanks very much. Really interesting, I think, to look at how some of these things can be repurposed, especially that retail space. Looking forward to logistics. I think that's really interesting. Thanks very much, Sean.
My pleasure.